Greetings and welcome to the Center for Global Development. It's my pleasure today to be able to have a conversation with Jesús Seade, who is a candidate for the position of the leadership of the World Trade Organization, and an opportunity for us to hear his views on how the WTO and the global trading system can serve the process of enhancing welfare of the developing countries and of the people who live in those countries. So Jesús, welcome very much. It's a real pleasure to be able to talk to you.
It's a great pleasure for me, Masu. Very nice to see you, and I'm grateful to the center for hosting me.
I thought, Jesús, we might start with a little bit just your sense of how, given all the tensions in the trading system today and given all the tensions about the role of the WTO and how the great economies of the world, the largest economies of the world, now see the role of the WTO, in that, how should developing countries be thinking about what they should be expecting from the WTO, and what would be your agenda for using the enormous power of a rules-based trading system for promoting development going forward? So I thought maybe just start a little bit with your thoughts on that.
Well, it's a gigantic subject. We could chat now, or we could agree to have a weekly seminar of 2 hours a week, cover it in the next couple of years.
We could do both.
But let me give it a shot. First of all, there's just no doubt about the benefits of open trade for all countries, and in particular for developing countries. The key, the path to development, well tested and well established. Nevertheless, we are living in an age, the attitudes on policy have big mega swings. People think that we are reverting to some measure of protectionism thanks to the pandemic. And I think that's rubbish. It's already 10 years old that we have been moving gradually from the ultra open mind trend in policies of the, starting in the 80s and then in a big way in the 90s and the first decade of the century. Then since the great crisis of 2007 to 2009, there's been a going back to some extent. And we are living through that. The pandemic has come to exacerbate that. But it's already several years that you have calls in different countries that we need to onshore value chains or nearshore value chains or enhance food security. There may be some merit in some of these things, but it's basically 90% plus of that are calls for protectionism. So it is an extremely serious business, which would be a mistake for the doers, for whoever they are, but particularly negative for developing countries. Now, the WTO, whatever happens to it is a consequence of whatever that atmosphere is, but it's also a causal factor, because if you strengthen it, it's chicken and egg. By strengthening the WTO, without talking yet as to how you do that, by strengthening the rules-based system and the mechanisms for mutual liberalization and the mechanisms for peaceful, orderly resolution of conflicts and all that, by strengthening that, you do two good things for developing countries. One is that you give them a better atmosphere for growth, which is good for them. But also, secondly, even if the only thing that you care about or you concentrate on is a trade between the United States and China, or the triangle with the European Union, the fact that they trade well rather than being at each other with trade wars enhances the trade of those big countries. Or put differently, the trade war we are going through in some measure between the United States and China, and also in some measure between the United States and Europe, that seeps growth from those big parties. And they are the engines of growth globally. So that also affects the situation for developing countries. So developing countries are hit directly and through the atmosphere they live in. So I think it is vital to work on mending fences and mending relations in general, in every aspect of that, but in particular, solving the problems of the WTO. Now, these problems are very vast, but I think they can be summarized in two things, one of which is basically the reason for the second, but they are both distinct. The first one is that after a history of successful periodic negotiations, since the creation of the GATT and since before that, since the creation of the non-discrimination clause in international trade, which is a United States creation in the 1930s. So since then, we begin to have a trend in global trade that has ensured mutual liberalization, which has enhanced the unilateral liberalization of each and every country, basically, and also discipline among countries. In the negotiations, you have negotiated market opening and also good disciplines to avoid conflict. And we had 8 successful rounds of negotiation from the 1940s and 50s onward until the creation of WTO in 1995. Well, that was a crowning jewel. What a wonderful world we created, and I'm proud to have been part of that. But since then, we've had essentially no negotiated results. Some minor, important, but minor. So there's a big hunger for negotiations, again, on 2 fronts. One is continuing opening, mutual opening. Mutual opening is very important because even if you only care about unilateral opening, which is good for your economy, there's always opposition because opening the market means that you remove the protection for those who are protected. By definition, they are losing benefits and they will oppose you. And it will always be easier to overcome that political opposition if you can say, oh, the others are opening. It's not only you, and this gives you new export opportunities. So mutual market opening is a wonderful thing for each country and for each country internally and by exchanging mutual benefits. So that's one thing that has been missing. And the other one is negotiations to develop the rules that you need because the world is changing constantly. And now we have a legal framework in the WTO where many of the goods we trade today do not exist. The way they are traded is not recognized or is often not recognized. And the main traders were not part of that negotiation. Not only China, Vietnam, Russia, many. So we have a big deficit on negotiations. We need to recover that path of negotiation. In turn, the lack of negotiations has meant that lots of things that surround you in the real world of trade are not recognized in the agreements. There's nothing that speaks of electronic trade and lots of things. The result is that whenever a dispute happens between 2 countries, when the judges, to call them that way, the panelists and then the appellate body want to address the issue, they increasingly often find that the rules are not complete enough. So they have to improvise. They have to decide how to solve it. So you begin to have decisions based on their judgment, not based on whatever was negotiated. And even worse, in the appellate body, which was created to be the second tier in this process, was created to provide assurance that there's no miscarriage of justice. So if somebody loses a panel, you can have this appellate body. And the appellate body is completely independent, it's beautifully designed, but we never thought of the fact that by the way we designed it, and I was part of that, by the way we designed it, there's a built-in tendency to begin to depart from the established agreements. Because, for example, we give it full independence full independence. Well, not quite full independence, because there's a higher body that supervises everything concerning disputes. But in each appeal, the appellate body is completely independent and should be. But then, if they are to be independent, they have to be an independent secretariat. And when they have an independent secretariat, you have a group of high-level bishops advising the judges, who are going to be there on a permanent basis forever. The judges, we took care of avoiding too much development of a mentality, because a mentality is basically something that looks and smells and tastes very jurisprudence, a mentality by the appellate body. You want them to come and be good judges and apply the agreements. But their advisors...
But if the agreements themselves are not complete, as you say, are not up to date, then in a way you're forcing them to take on the role of lawmakers rather than of judges.
But on top of that, they are top-class people, but who are part-timers. These are part-timers. You might become one next year, Masood. If I'm there, I'll make sure they invite you to be one of the
I look forward to
members. People who have their jobs, who are experts on trade, legal experts on trade, have their jobs in a law firm or in some other practice or academics around the world. They come only for the appeal when it's going to be in session. So they don't develop this esprit de corps, this common mentality. And even more, they have a limited time span of 4 years, renewable ones, 8 years max. And not the same time span. Somebody may be leaving next year when the other one is just coming. So they don't develop a common mentality. And that was intentional. So they come fresh to apply the agreements. But the guys who support them are top lawyers, highly paid lawyers, who are full-time, not part-time like this, full-time, and contemporaneous. They come and spend all the time, years and years together. Yes. So they develop the same kind of team mentality as a good football team will develop, because they play together year in, year out. So when an appeal comes for them to judge, they may, and has often happened, that they look at something similar that they considered 12 years ago. They say, oh, this is similar. We have to follow the same line. And not only they follow the same analysis, but they actually say it. So that's very much like creating jurisprudence. What is jurisprudence in common law legal systems? Is the creation of law
precedent, yeah,
by the judges. So that is very serious. That is what has driven the United States bananas, and they have blocked the appointment of judges. So the whole thing is on the floor, but it's in good measure due to the lack of negotiation.
So Jesus, can I ask you? Do you?
We need to attend to those two things.
Yeah. So I was going to say. Yeah. I mean, I think you've laid out a very compelling way the sort of nature of the core problem, and I think it's fantastic that you're able to sort of simplify it into what are the underlying issues here. But resolving these requires political leadership and momentum. So, you're the head of the WTO, Director General of the WTO, a very important role. But in the end, you can only do what your membership is willing to go forward with. And you have a sort of role of helping them to define a path and build a consensus and move forward. But is your sense today that there is a community of countries, maybe the largest, maybe middle powers, maybe some emerging powers, that can come together to bring about this renewal, this new rebirth almost, I would say, of not just the rules and the mechanics, but also the faith in the system that is required for people to adhere to it? And how do you see that problem?
No, that's a very serious problem without the slightest doubt. The ultimate element that is missing, implicit in your words, that you are pointing at, is confidence, it's trust, it's wanting to do something together. It's a belief that this is good for everybody, it's good for me, it's good for you, let's do it. And that's something very much that we had when we were negotiating the creation of WTO. If you look at the substance of that moment, I hold that it was every bit as difficult, or probably more difficult, than the challenges we're facing now. Just imagine, agriculture was a world of such government interference in Europe, in the United States, in many countries, was being brought to be subject to common rules. Textiles was the most horrendous interference with the market, even worse than anything ever attempted by the Soviet Union. And in textiles, you were saying the multi-fabric arrangement is dismantled. Then intellectual property, you had these conventions on patents, on copyright, on all these things that were signed by 10, 12, 15 countries 100 years ago with no link to trade, no teeth, and just a few signatories. All of a sudden, we wanted to enlarge it to 100 signatories, deepen the commitments because they were updated and expanded, and say, and by the way, this is linked to trade. If you fail to meet your obligations, you will get your exports blocked. It was really a major challenge, and we made it because there was trust. And with trust, there was a feeling of importance, of need. In those days, Masoud, I tell you, there was not 1 week when I wouldn't have 1 or 2 businessmen from the United States visiting Geneva to lobby or to find out, or both. And then for every American that came, there was at least 1 other that also came from Germany or from India or from Japan. Now, I know it from my friends in Geneva. Not a single businessman has gone into that kind of area for 20 years. Everybody thinks that what matters is the USMCA and regional agreements and the dispute with China and the phase 1 with China and the agreements with China. All that matters. Not only dangerous, but it's actually wrong, because everything would be a lot worse if there wasn't a WTO. The USMCA would probably not have a car industry component in it if the countries were free to do whatever they wanted. It was the WTO obligations that had kept us in a good orderly situation. What we need to do is to, first of all, to have confidence, trust in the fact that things have gotten so bad that we have favorable winds of a negative kind. The WTO is really falling into irrelevance. And that is a call for action for all the countries, because all the countries have benefited. The United States included, and China certainly included. First. Secondly, we need to awaken the interest and the support of civil society in the private sector. When we were negotiating the USMCA, when things got really haywire with a complete rejection by the Democrats of the agreement that had been finalized by President Trump with the former President of Mexico and the Prime Minister of Canada, a complete rejection. We really were looking to this ourselves. There was a complete no to the whole thing. But we worked hard on reawakening the interest of the private sector. In Mexico was already more or less present. In the United States, both us, the negotiators, my 57 consuls and ambassadors in the United States and Canada were completely active, a complete plan of action to awaken interest. There was not one governor that was not visited, one firm with business with Mexico that was not visited to say, hey, this is important, you have to support it. And within a few months, the United States put together, the private sector, an amazing organization of support to the USMCA. And the private sector was central in achieving that. We need to work on that with your support, because you are very much a liaison between private sector and policy, the world of policy. But so is Davos, and so are many organizations around. So we need to work with you, with your help, and through you to awaken interest and support of civil society. And then we need to just exercise force and talent and pressure to bring the different actors to the table. And for that, if I may run a little commercial, I can tell you of the 8 candidates for the Director General position, only one has been involved in any way in international trade negotiations. And I'm not saying big international trade negotiations, could be small ones, but they have not. The Korean candidate has been involved in a big negotiation, United States, Korea, but not as a chief negotiator. The chief negotiator was her predecessor as minister, Minister Kim. The British, fantastic man, Liam Fox, I like him, but very much from above as minister, not really engaged in negotiations. And the others busy in other areas or internal economy, not negotiations. I not only have been party to negotiations, but I have been the chief negotiator in the two most important commercial treaties now in place, the WTO and the USMCA. So I have plenty of expertise on negotiation. I know how to call people to a table. I know how to try ideas and find ways to propose an avenue for consensus. And that's what I plan to do.
Well, Jesus, that's a very compelling point at which to end. As you say, I think it's going to be a combination of trust and a combination also of the ability to convene, to bring people together, to understand the underlying technical aspects. And all I can say is we wish you well in the next coming few weeks when this process will unfold. And whatever the outcome, we look forward to continue a conversation with you on this very important set of issues. So thanks again for giving us your time.
Thank you, Masood. Thank you for the time. I hope to be elected. And whether I am or not, I hope to visit you in the center in the near future as soon as the pandemic allows. Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Thank you.